in the green letters.
Yeah.
Look how nice that looks with the logo in the middle and the
It
and the
does. It
letters.
looks
It's
beautiful.
really nice.
But I will pray definitely, and I can talk to you if you like, just to vent, just to brainstorm. If you want to talk and just brainstorm. Brainstorm. Should I remind her to call? Hopefully she's going to call.
I texted her at
Okay.
4:15 and said
I can talk for an hour and 15 minutes if she doesn't call.
she can.
We'll talk
So-
about this book. Yeah, thank you for everything, Jerry. We will send you. We can do so much more with a place because it's available all the time. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
Is it on a Tuesday?
Do you know when? Okay. Let us know. Well, let us
Okay.
know.
Controlling all bodily functions, emotions, and memory too. Our brains are amazing in stress situations. They regulate other things too. Brains and the spinal cord moves of their own accord. Spinal and cranial nerves. Systems are central and also peripheral. For those on each of the curves. Occipital, temporal, frontal, parietal, sphenoid, and ethmoid all fused. Cerebrum goes left and right. How do we stay upright? Cerebellum is refused. The brainstem has pollen to brain and medulla to relay info along. For heart rate and wheezing, digestion and sneezing. We hope that you learn from this song.
Hey. Okay. Hi guys, thanks for listening to Brainstorms. Today we're having a calling guest. We're talking to mental health advocate Laura Pagliano. She has a personal story to share with us about how mental illness impacted her and her family's life. And she's going to tell us a little bit about some resources for people who are dealing with loved ones with mental illness, specifically schizophrenia. That's the illness she's most familiar with. And she's going to talk about some ways in which stigma negatively affects those with mental illnesses and some positive changes that have come about in the world because of mental health advocates like herself. So I'm excited to talk to her, and we're just going to wait for her to call in. I think it's going to be a very informative show. A lot of these things, I talked to her ahead of time a little bit, and I didn't know anything that I had never heard half the things she was talking about. So I'm excited to learn more. And
I have to tell you something that happened. I saved this to tell you on the show.
Okay.
There is a member of our family that I'm friends with. I'm not going to say which side of whose side of the family so that nobody can figure out who it is. But we're friendly. We have lunch sometimes. We talk on the phone sometimes. And this woman, this mother, just last week told me about her child who may have a very serious mental illness.
Yeah.
And she said, I'm not telling anybody else. But she told me.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're close and, you know, she thought I might have a little bit of resources to offer her. But when you talk about the stigma affecting people, it really, really does.
Yeah.
If a child had diabetes or mono or anything else.
Talk about the casserole illness. That's a phrase I had never
Yeah,
heard
I
before.
read something, I don't remember where it came from, where somebody said, where's my casserole? You know, if your family goes through something, if mom in the family sprains an ankle, if somebody's got mono, if everybody's down with
flu or something.
Yeah, you know, friends. Well, if you have a baby, bring, I mean, that's a happy occasion, but, you know, people will come over, they'll clean for you, they'll bring some meals that you can keep in the fridge. And when you get home from a behavioral hospital or mental hospital, there's no casserole waiting for you.
Yeah.
And so this friend of mine, well, that's one of the reasons nobody knows. And the stigma is what prevented her. You know, she doesn't want her privacy invaded, doesn't want a bunch of people telling her, well, you should just do this, you should just do that. And
yeah, I thought that's
just
a good
true
term,
to true to life example.
Illness. Yeah. Yeah, like if you
if it was another kind of illness, I think she would have let it be more known.
Yeah.
So I just think that's I understand, but I think it's a shame.
It is a shame.
Yeah.
Yes. So, we're going to talk about schizophrenia a little bit, the illness, what exactly the symptoms are, what the treatments are, and the stigma behind it. And I think it's very misunderstood. I don't completely understand it, so I'm excited to learn about it. It's obviously a horrible illness, but I think if we educate more people about it, it makes it easier for other people to deal with their loved ones having that illness, because they can have support from other people, you know, because they're educated. So I think it's going to be very educational.
It's a scary illness because when people hear that word, they think crazy.
Yeah.
And they think violent.
Yeah, no, it doesn't mean that.
The statistics I've read are that someone seriously mentally ill, like bipolar disorder, bipolar 1, there can be some breaking with reality.
Delusions.
Yeah, there can be
psychosis.
Delusions, there can be psychosis, and with schizophrenia, statistically, people with those illnesses are much more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators of violence.
Yeah. Yeah, I read that too.
So you don't realize it, but there's a lot of people I deal with are usually moms. There's a lot of family members, a lot of moms who have grown children with this illness or an illness like it, and they're worried about the treatment that their child is getting, their grown child, because it's an illness where they don't always know reality. Yeah. And what they're reacting to is real to them. And they can be misunderstood, it can be misinterpreted, they can be hurt, they can be put in jail when what they need is psychiatric help.
I read...
It's scary.
We're gonna... Oh, here she is. Yeah. Hello, Laura.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for being on the show.
No problem.
We're gonna talk for a little bit about what you're most familiar with.
Wait, I want to say hello to Laura. I've never spoken to her before. Hi, Laura, this is Elena.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. It's a pleasure to
virtually
meet you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the chance to talk about my family and mental illness.
Yeah.
Well, we've just been chatting, but...
Yeah, I have some things I wanted to ask you about, and I just want you to basically tell your story a little bit.
Sure.
Just what your family has gone through with mental illness and what your experience is.
Okay, great.
Go ahead.
Okay, so my son was an athlete and a musician, and he had a million friends, and he was really well-liked. He wasn't big on school. He mostly liked the sports part of school, but he was a great kid, super nice kid. So he, the end of his year that he was 16, headed toward his 17th birthday, he started to act very strange, odd behavior, almost constantly at home. I could tell he was trying to hide some things from me, but I couldn't tell why or what was happening. And very quickly, he became extremely paranoid. He started wrapping everything in the house in plastic or paper. He accused me of contaminating his food, poisoning his water and food. He accused the dog of poisoning and contaminating the entire house, and I really couldn't figure it out. So these behaviors escalated very quickly. I went away for a 2-day trip over a weekend, and when I came back, it was like my child had been stolen and replaced with the movie version of Howard Hughes. He was urinating in the bathtub. He had rags tied around his face to prevent germs from getting to him. Like I said, everything was wrapped in plastic. His entire bedroom was cleaned out. He had taken everything in his bedroom except for the bed and dresser and put it in a back room back in the basement. Because he said, if I didn't put it in the house, how do I know how it got here? How do I know who put these things in my room? And I thought, who cares who put them in your room?
Yeah.
Like, what is the point? But what was happening, and I had no experience in it, but what was happening was that he was experiencing clinical paranoia, which is really a devastating symptom of mental illness.
But you knew something must be wrong, but I would imagine you wouldn't know what. But
well, drastically wrong. And I'll tell you, the truth is, I was hoping it was even self-induced.
Yeah.
You know, that these odd behaviors were something that you know, he was doing to himself, or using drugs and alcohol. That was preferable to thinking that he had mental illness. But you know, honestly, within a few weeks of that trip, he was just already becoming non-functional. So we immediately went to a GP, a medical doctor, and I said to the doctor, just if you could, ask him about his day and listen to what he says, and then tell me if I have a problem.
And did he go willingly to the doctor?
He went willingly to the doctor, sure. And the stuff he told the doctor was just astounding. He said there's something wrong with the whole world. Everyone was evil. And no one was safe. And he was in danger of being attacked at any moment. And as these things came out of his mouth, I was sitting there just crestfallen, you know, listening to these ideas that he had. And when he got done, the doctor said, yeah, you have a big problem.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I said, well, what should I do about it? He said, well, I can't help you, but you need to get a therapist or go see a specialist of some kind. So that started our journey on a few doctors who may have done one or two good things for us, but by and large were not a good use of time or money.
Yeah.
Did this include
psychiatrists? In hindsight. And this is a very common problem when someone is coming down with what we call the prodromal phase of mental illness, meaning the beginning, the starting phase, before they hit full-blown mental illness.
Because it doesn't, like, show exactly the extreme symptoms, you mean? So
right, it kind of gradually comes on, and the person experiences a waiver of ongoing, you know, symptoms remission, etc. And it can be very confusing. And so I always tell parents, go through a medical door first, if you can. Take your child to a medical physician, and I don't mean to exclude psychiatrists or therapists, but get him in front of a medical doctor who can run tests to rule out anything else that could be happening to your child. And it's a big problem because parents don't know where to start, and there's a lot of hucksterism in the mental illness and mental health world. And so, just like we did, we went to a therapist for probably 6 months who basically said my loose parenting style was to blame for all these issues. You know, my kids didn't have a ton of rules, and that's because they followed a couple, 3 big ones, and they didn't need a ton of rules. So, but by the time we had seen a therapist for 4 or 5 months, my son Zachariah was just becoming fairly crippled with illness. He began sleeping 12, 16 hours a day at all times of the day or night, refusing to eat, refusing to bathe. Like I said, doing very strange things, and really preparing for attack. That scared me the most out of anything, because I thought, what if I come into his bedroom and surprise him and he attacks me, just because he was so convinced that he was going to be killed at any second. And so finally he just became too sick to even function, and then I was able to with a psychiatrist, get him into a hospital, Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore.
Okay, wait, I have a
where
question.
They really,
if they had taken you more seriously when you first noticed the symptoms, do you think the result would have been different from what it wound up being?
I don't know if the result would have been different because he was a very sick child.
Yeah.
He became quite ill over time. But it certainly would have helped to get a jump on it earlier. Mm-hmm. One of the big pushes in the mental illness world right now, which is an amazing thing, is they are starting to look at first episode psychosis, meaning let's treat the person right during the first breakdown.
Oh, yeah.
Let's get them the correct medicine, the correct diagnosis, all the wraparound services, so that they don't continue to have psychotic episodes. Mm-hmm. With every episode of psychosis, your brain is damaged more. It takes more medicine to come back from that.
I didn't know that.
And yes,
I didn't know that
it's really
either.
brain damage. It's sad. So, early on, in dealing with his mental illness, nobody told me he was mentally ill. That was probably the worst part.
Yeah.
My son got arrested for a marijuana ticket, and when we went to court, I had a letter from the therapist, and I opened it myself before we got to court, and it said, I've been treating Zachariah for 6 months for a serious mental illness. And I thought, what?
Yeah.
No one said that to me. And so here's another problem that people experience in general in the world of mental illness. What other illness could you have where a doctor would hide a diagnosis from you? Right?
There's
not
nothing.
telling you that your child was severely mentally ill.
Yeah.
And it happens all the time in the world of mental health.
Yeah.
Is it that
These
they
poor
don't they don't want to upset you? Is it that they don't want to upset you by using those words, or they kind of think that you somehow know? I don't know why they would do that.
Yeah, they sort of see, and this is by and large an experience that everyone is having, not just me. But they sort of see family and parents as the enemy. Maybe we're the root cause of whatever problems are happening, and it's really all to protect the patient's rights and to protect his confidentiality and to allow him to participate in his own treatment.
Well,
because
wasn't your
historically, mentally ill people get railroaded by families.
How old was your son when he was
16? She said
16. So they should still be telling you things because he's still a minor, right?
That's right. That's right. But across the various states in the United States, a person is allowed to refuse treatment at different ages.
Oh.
So even somewhere out west, I can't remember the exact state, but a child's allowed to decline treatment at the age of 16.
Wow.
So there's a lot of variation, but providers can be very suspicious of families who are trying to get their loved ones care, and they are very often completely shut out. There's HIPAA laws that protect patients, and they're very often shut out. So some of the things that we experienced during the onset of his illness are very common for lots of families going through this.
And I understand the HIPAA guidelines and everything, but that seems more like for a physical, because if you have a mental illness, you might not even know, you might not remember or know if there's anything wrong. So that seems like counterintuitive to me.
Well, think about a person with Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Think about a person with a traumatic brain injury. Think about someone who's had a stroke. Mm-hmm. Those patients have very obvious cognitive deficits, very obvious impairments, and they require assistance from the family and they require help. But in the mental health world, all that's hidden. The person is expected to make every decision for himself, even if he's completely incompetent. That's not taken into consideration.
Yeah. I was thinking that it's a lot like Alzheimer's, but the medical professionals in that case include the family. They know the family is needed to help.
Right. And I mean, if your mother had a stroke and you were going to bring her home from the hospital, they would, of course, prepare you and get you set up with resources and help and respite care and everything that you need to be able to care for a person with diminished capacity at home.
Yeah.
But in the world of mental health, it's completely the opposite. And the reason it's the opposite is because we have a long tradition of mistreating mentally ill people in institutions and other facilities. And so the backlash of that has gone, the pendulum has swung so far the other way that now families are shut out.
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy, because they're not going to take the best care of those patients. They're not their family. And
That's right.
It's ringing true to me what you're saying, because I have a family member who I was taking for treatment for a long time. And I liked the professional. I liked the psychiatrist. I read up on everything. I thought I knew what we were dealing with. But I remember the day that he said, I am not comfortable treating this person as an outpatient anymore. And I cried. I was so shocked.
Right.
That this
you
person
had no idea.
And looking back now, how, with the things we were involved in and how long we were seeing the psychiatrist, why was I so, somehow I was shocked.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's something else that happens that's a physical change in the brain that many mental health providers don't acknowledge. They deny this fact. It's called agnosignosia, big long word, that means inability to recognize one's own illness.
Yeah, I read about that. Just yesterday, we talked for a few minutes yesterday, and I was looking up symptoms of schizophrenia, and that was one of the things that I was reading about.
Well, and that makes perfect sense, because if you are delusional,
right,
that's what delusions are. It's your reality. You believe this is real. You don't believe there's something wrong with you.
But they're physically incapable of recognizing the fact that they're ill, because the part of the brain that would do that becomes damaged.
Oh.
And so, but many mental health providers, don't believe in it, and it doesn't matter if it's science, they don't believe in it, and they like to focus on behaviors, right, not medical causes.
Yeah.
And so, it's an incredibly difficult situation when the person doesn't recognize that they're ill and can't recognize it.
Now, do you find that psychiatrists acknowledge that word I can't say, but the other...
Yes. So most people will tell you, most psychiatrists will say, the patient lacks insight into his illness. Right? That's how they put it to you. They don't really tell you he's so damaged that he's never going to be able to understand that he's sick.
Yeah.
And so just as an example, when my son was first sick and he was still pretty functional and could go to school, he would tell people, my mom said I have bipolar disorder. Now I'm stuck with it. And I would say, what? I would never, I'm not diagnosing you. We were at a hospital. The hospital said you have XYZ, right? But they don't want to accept the fact, and neither would you or I. We would not want to accept the fact that we have a mental illness now to deal with the rest of our lives.
So what's the difference between, I can't say it, and agnosignosia and denial? They're different, right?
Well, I mean, they really aren't different. The agnosignosia makes you deny the fact that you have mental illness. And I know one of the things that you want to talk about tonight is stigma, but the stigma is so widespread, and it's so ingrained in our culture that patients, even if you don't have agnosignosia, even if you're at the beginning, you don't want to admit that you're mentally ill.
Yeah.
One thing that happened early on, he was completely breaking down. He couldn't go to school. He was sleeping constantly. This is, say, like 6 months in. It was just a gigantic disaster, and we kept trying to get into a hospital, and they would give the bed away before we could get over there on the same day.
Wow.
And so there's so few beds for mentally ill people.
Yes.
So now I just lost my train of thought. So we were sitting one night, and just in a moment of clarity, my son said to me, something's going on in this family, and I would appreciate it if you would tell me what it is. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you're not the same mom that I always had.
Oh.
My mom was always happy, and now you cry every day.
Oh.
Yeah.
He said, and there's some reason that you're sad, but nobody is telling me what it is. And I said, well, I'm sad because you're sick. And he said, I am? And I said, yeah. He said, well, what do I have? I said, well, they think you have a mental illness. He said, well, how did I get it? I said, we don't know. People just get it.
Yep.
He said, well, how do I get rid of it? I said, well, we're going to go to a hospital and find that out, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, that explains a lot.
Uh-huh.
And then about 2 minutes later, he was just mumbling to himself again,
Oh, wow.
lost in reality. And it's just,
Some of this had to be harder on you than on him.
there are no
Because
winners in mental illness.
you were very aware of everything as it unfolded, and you hope that the person with the illness is shielded from some of it by the illness itself.
I'm glad that you said that, because they call bipolar disorder, which is what they thought he had at first, but they call that the forgiving illness, because the things that you do when you're psychotic and manic, you don't remember them.
Oh.
And so you can keep your self-image intact because you just don't even remember what you did. And as soon as you feel better, you feel like the same person that you always were. So I'm
and you
glad that
wonder
you
why
said that.
everyone around you is exhausted and irritated.
And crying.
Yeah.
And so he was hospitalized for 3 or 4 weeks. They came up with the bipolar disorder with psychotic and catatonic features. He became very stiff right before he went to the hospital, and he started Franken-walking, walking with his hands out in front of him and kind of shuffling.
Yeah.
And when I was pressing the therapist for a hospital, he said, a hospital is not a panacea for all bad behavior, Laura. And I said, well, he can't walk now. So how is that behavior? Something is drastically wrong. And so he was hospitalized for 3 or 4 weeks. He was let out for a weekend. He disappeared overnight, right? We couldn't find him at all, and we were right back at the hospital Monday morning for another 3 weeks.
I'm really shocked by how horrible these doctors treated you and didn't tell you everything and didn't even believe it was a physical...
I'm going to guess it's not all psychiatrists, though, because I think the psychiatrists understand more of it.
Oh, yeah, the therapist.
But there's not enough psychiatrists. So when you're seeing... And I don't understand
therapists
this either.
are all about behavioral everything.
But
right.
I could be a therapist, and I'd be intelligent enough to know certain things are out of my realm.
Yeah.
Just because what I do works for a majority of a certain type of situations, you can't deny that there's some things that are medical in nature, that are chemical in nature, that are biological in nature, and not behavioral treatment isn't going to be enough. Why wouldn't you just tell that person,
right,
this is not, what I do isn't for this. You need to go someplace else.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, a good doctor will say, this is out of my realm.
Yep.
You need to see a specialist. So, the first therapist did some good things for us. I don't want to discount the help.
Right.
Yeah.
But he hid the diagnosis from me. He delayed Zachary's treatment by probably months by not telling me. 3 or 4 years later, I got a note out of the blue, an email out of the blue, that said, I've been thinking about you and Zach. How is he? And I wrote back, he has schizophrenia. And then he wrote back, oh, I thought so. And I said, oh, you thought so, did you? I mean, what the heck? So I said to him, I'm going to come and collect Zachary's medical records. I'd like to talk to you.
Yeah.
And guess what his medical records were? 3 sheets of paper. Like, he literally took no notes for 6 months.
Oh,
it was a 3-sheet summary. And the entire summary was exactly how psychotic and sick my child was. all this information that he didn't share with me, even though he was only a junior in high school.
Yeah.
And so I asked him, why would you not tell me that he was psychotic? Why would you do that? He said, Laura, if I tell people that their child is psychotic or has a mental illness, the parents run out the door, they deny it, they run out the door to find someone else, and then the child never gets any treatment. And I said, well, he wasn't getting any treatment anyway.
Yeah.
You know, talk
therapy.
therapy.
This is a therapist. Talk therapy is not for
Right.
schizophrenia. It's
Thank you.
Unbelievable. There must be
Yeah.
some families not like yours where perhaps they behave a different way that these counselors and therapists have had experience with that makes them think they're helping the kid by
withholding the information.
yeah, they must have had. I'm thinking maybe they had experiences with parents that were bad. That the parents really were refusing to accept things. But it's a shame. I mean, Megan has had mental illness or has mental illness, and I got a hold of her entire thing. If you could see me, it's radio, but this thick of records. Couldn't read any of it. Couldn't read a word of it because it was handwritten. Couldn't read a word of it. So I don't know what they think they're doing. You can't bring someone home who's having psychotic episodes and you don't know it, because you're not going to take.
That's right.
What if you have younger children at home that can be hurt? That can.
That's right.
That's just unbelievable. But I believe you, because I know you, I know your story. But a lot of times when I hear negative things, I think, well, sometimes people aren't telling you the whole story. Sometimes there's other problems in the family, but I don't believe that is the case with you.
No, I said we had a little happy love cocoon of a family. Never had any problems with my children. I raised them by myself. They were wonderful kids. I always worked to support them. I was never married. We had a very happy family, and then schizophrenia literally ruined our lives. My son passed away. My daughter lost her brother. I lost my only son. We went bankrupt. What else happened? But I said many times, it's a good thing I don't have younger siblings at home or a husband. Yeah. I can see exactly how parents with a sick child get divorced.
Yeah.
Or the whole family just becomes a sick family, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm so sorry for your loss and all that you've been through.
Oh, thank you. It's been terrible. I feel like I'm not a big believer in everything happens for a reason. But I say if my child was going to get schizophrenia, he couldn't stick up for himself. He couldn't give voice to it. Yep. But I can. Mm-hmm. So he's not here anymore, and I'm his voice.
Yeah. Well, you're doing a wonderful job, and I'm sure you're helping more people than you know. There's people listening who aren't going to call in. I know some of them, and you hear about schizophrenia, and you think of it as something that happens out there, but usually you don't really.
Right.
Are you okay?
Oh yeah, I'm fine.
Megan's very.
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Very sympathetic. You don't think of it as something that really hits anybody you know, and a lot of times it does hit families you know. You just don't know it.
Oh, yeah, that's true. You don't know it.
So, like I said, there's someone in my family who had this discussion with me a week ago, who is listening tonight and is going to get a heads up and a lot of information that's going to be very beneficial for their family. And
thank you, and thank you for doing this.
You wouldn't even know that, but I know that it's true, and I'm sure there's others as well.
I have a question. Did you have a history of mental illness in the family where you had some clue that it might be mental illness, or?
Well, I have seen mental illness many years ago. My first job out of college was working in a nursing home, and surprisingly, three-quarters of the population were mentally ill.
Okay.
Living in a nursing home. Yeah. And so I got used to people with schizophrenia saying nonsense things or accusing someone of weird stuff. And I was just used to it.
Yeah.
But when it happens to your own child, it's so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
They change drastically from the child that you knew. And it's almost it's almost too much to comprehend. Yeah, you're exactly right. You never think it will happen to you. You think it happens in families where there's bad parenting or some drug use. After Zachary was diagnosed with what we thought was bipolar, which is sort of a better...
Bipolar is such a broad range.
Yeah, I have bipolar disorder, but I have bipolar 2 disorder, so it's much less severe than bipolar 1, which is more of the main.
Right.
So.
Bipolar is a sister illness to schizophrenia, and it has many of the same components, and schizophrenia has many of the same components as bipolar. But the major distinction is that bipolar disorder, both types 1 and 2, are a mood disorder.
Yeah.
Your moods cannot be regulated without help, and they are super extreme. Yeah. Either down in the dumps, basement, can't get out of bed type of depression, to manic, awake around the clock for 3 weeks at a time, shopping sprees, drug use, manic behavior on the other end, and then usually after manic behavior they crash.
Yeah, and the manic behavior can be very reckless. They think nothing's going to happen to them. They do a lot of dangerous things.
That's right, risky behavior, lots of risky behavior. Whereas schizophrenia can have a mood component. Certainly it comes with a lot of depression for the patient, but it is primarily a thought disorder, a disruption in logical thinking.
Oh, I never heard that before. Mood disorder versus thought disorder.
So a message is trying to go from one neuron to another, and instead of hitting a hole, it splats against the wall. I always think of it like that. The messages are misrouted and really, really, really cause cognitive deficits. Schizophrenia has positive symptoms and it has negative symptoms. The positive symptoms are the ones that we can control more easily with medicine. The negative symptoms are very hard to negotiate. So positive symptoms are hallucinations, delusions, sleeplessness, mania, auditory delusions. They even smell things that aren't there. And the negative symptoms are lack of self-care. They don't bathe. They don't cut their fingernails. Lack of motivation. And then this one, to me, is just devastating. Inability to experience pleasure.
Yeah.
If you think of what a poverty of life you will experience when you can't experience pleasure, it's really just astounding. So the medicines that we have work much better on positive symptoms, controlling hallucinations and delusions, and auditory and visual hallucinations, but don't work very well on negative symptoms. And the negative symptoms are primarily the ones that really impair the patient's life.
And that isn't the same thing as depression. You can't treat the inability to experience happiness or a pleasant life with an antidepressant.
Right. So the two illnesses are very different. But when he looked like he had bipolar disorder, he sort of acted like it.
Yeah.
He was wildly up and wildly down, and he was psychotic at times. As the years went on, within a couple years, his symptoms were less mood and more psychosis. Okay. And so
now, he was
not misdiagnosed, but re-diagnosed, right, later on.
So when you had the correct diagnosis, was medicine able to help him at all?
Yeah, he sort of became untreatable. There are some patients that just don't respond to the meds. So the medicine cleared up probably as much as it was going to clear up for him. And they tried them all, a couple times. They went through them all. And he was pretty much left with what I would call low-grade psychosis. So he was always slightly, psychotic. He could converse. He could do some chores. He could, some activity. But by and large, he was psychotic all the time and paranoid all the time. So the important thing for people to know is that the earlier you are treated, the earlier you are diagnosed and treated, the better your prognosis by far overall. So it's important to get your child in front of a medical doctor when you suspect there's depression or mental illness.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it does damage to the brain that can't be repaired, those episodes.
Right. And it's sad, where he was when he was 18, 19 compared to where he was when he was 23, health-wise, was pretty drastic, and he was never on treatment.
Yeah.
Wow. And this is him taking the medicine he's supposed to take, which I understand. The problem is that a lot of people with schizophrenia, the nature of the disorder,
well, they're
paranoid.
I can't say it. Anosognia, something like that.
Either they don't believe they're sick, or they're afraid you're trying to contaminate their medicine and they won't take it.
Right. And, paranoia, people don't realize this, but paranoia is just gripping. It is unbreakable. You will not negotiate. You will not talk a patient out of paranoia. And paranoia colors everything. Yeah. My son would return to the hospital for yet another 2-month stay, and he would accuse all the doctors of not being doctors. And he'd be really upset the first week or so he was there. Am I here to get a chip implanted in my head? Did the government throw me in the hospital? Who are these people who are treating me? They say they're doctors, but I don't believe it. And these are the same people that treated him every single time, over 13 hospitalizations for between 1 and 3 months. So paranoia interferes with treatment just drastically.
So what is the best case scenario for someone exhibiting this kind of behavior at 16 or 18 or 20, and they are still living at home, so they've got some family support? Obviously, the most important thing you said was when you suspect something very serious like this, get them in front of a medical doctor right away. What if they don't What if they don't want to go? What if they're 18 or 19?
Then you're kind of stuck. You cannot force them. You can call the police when things are going wrong in your house, and they'll say, well, unless he's a danger to himself or others, we don't intervene. No one can be treated. There's a legal barrier. The legal standard for treatment literally is danger to self or others. So when do you suppose patients meet that standard?
When it's too late.
When it's too late, right? When they've hurt themselves, or they've hurt someone else, or they've burned down the house, or any other thing that happens because they're so paranoid and psychotic.
So
the best...
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Well, the best case scenario is that someone identifies your problem right away. You get into a clinic or another medical setting that treats first episode psychosis, and those clinics are popping up around the country. Baltimore has an amazing first episode clinic where you are treated as soon as you're sick. And those patients have they return to their normal lives much earlier and in much better shape, right, for the long haul. So getting someone medicated correctly, diagnosed correctly, and then providing them with the many, many services that they need and the family needs, psychosocial supports. They need advice. When do I tell someone I'm dating that I'm mentally ill? How do I hold a job? How do I take care of an apartment and wash my clothes? How do I socialize? So they need all these, a million supports to go along with medicine. And then I think you have a chance.
What is this? You said in Baltimore there's is it called First Psychotic Episode? Is that what you said?
Yes, it's called First Episode Clinic. So the acronym is actually EPIC, Early Psychosis Intervention Clinic. And so early psychosis intervention is becoming the wave of the future. And I would like to, in 20 years, see just clinics all over the country where we treat this just like we do sore throats and, or diabetes, managing a long-term illness. So that idea is making its way into medicine, that first episode intervention.
Well, that's fantastic, and that's something I want people listening to know. If you suspect that someone you love is having these kinds of episodes, you want to get them in front of a medical doctor right away, and there are first episode clinics, and for people in our area, several states around here, there's one in Baltimore, and that's what this is such a difficult illness, and
yes,
like some medical illnesses, if you don't get help early enough, damage is done that can't be reversed.
Be undone. Yeah.
So.
And the other thing that parents can do right away for their children, and I'm just talking about a parent-child relationship, not husband-wife or the many other people who suffer.
Yeah.
But if you suspect that your child is becoming ill, you know your child. You're the one that knows him or her. You know, impress that upon the doctors. Tell them that you are a helper. Tell them that you want this to go well, right? Try to partner with them. Offer to partner. Tell them, I'm here to help, right? And have them include you as much as they can in the treatment. But the other thing that parents can actually do is get guardianship of their child and make medical plans for when he's not competent.
Okay.
How do you do that?
Early on. Sorry?
How would you do that if you had a 20-year-old and you were beginning to see these things and you wanted to get guardianship? I imagine it would be easy if the child was willing to sign whatever they needed to sign.
Right. But you can take competency away from someone. It's a big struggle, but you can declare them incompetent and become their guardian, and it would take evidence of a lot of disasters, right? Or you know, a real need to intervene before the courts would let you do it. And it's going to cost you $25,000 probably, because lawyers aren't cheap and it takes a long time to get guardianship.
Wow.
But then you can make medical decisions for them when they are not competent to do so for themselves.
So document some things, $25,000, and you can get guardianship, basically.
That sounds easy.
What if
Yeah, well, a lawyer told me personally, it's gonna break the bank for you to get guardianship. You can try it. It's not easy to come by, and then he said it's almost impossible to reverse.
Well, that's good.
So, right, but had I done that, and then Zachary was well later on, you know, no one would believe him to be well, and you know, an illness like bipolar disorder can prevent you from getting a law license. It can prevent you from becoming a doctor. You know, these places that look at ethical things and things in your past, it can prevent you. You have to prove that you're symptom-free. So it's really, really a tough illness. But also, if you do get guardianship, it's very hard to reverse later on.
Yeah.
What about if you've got someone, like I said, over 18, and you're seeing these things and you're not sure what's going to happen? What about just getting them to sign, I think it's the HIPAA papers, saying that they allow you to have access to all their medical records, so that you can at least, because I've heard about people who've got a grown child in a hospital and they can't even get an update on them.
Well, it gets worse in mental illness. It's even, the HIPAA restrictions are applied across the board so strictly. The interpretation of HIPAA in the mental health world is much different than in the physical health world, let's say.
Really?
Well, in physical health, if you brought your grown child to a hospital and they were going to return home from you, the expectation is you're their caregiver, and the hospital and different resources show up to help you out.
Yeah.
In mental illness, you're just denied access, you're denied knowledge. Here's a good example. My son overdosed one night. The phone rang at 11:30, and it was a ambulance a technician who said, "We're taking your son to a hospital." I said, "Where?" "Well, we can't tell you." Can you imagine this?
What's he calling you for at all?
Well, then why are you calling?
Yeah.
And I said, "Well," she said, "you know, we're just calling to let you know." I said, "Can you tell me what happened? Why is he going in an ambulance?" "I can't tell you." I said, "Can you tell me if I guess?" Right? She said, "Well, maybe."
Oh my
and
gosh.
I said, "Are you a parent? Are you going to make me drive around at midnight to every hospital to find him and then find out what's wrong?" And she finally gave in and said he had a drug overdose. You know, she finally caved in.
Mm-hmm.
But that experience is what everybody experiences across the board. Your child goes to a hospital, you can call the hospital. They won't even tell you that he's a patient there.
Yeah.
So
You're expected to take someone home without knowing a diagnosis, a treatment plan, or any medicine that they need. It's just ludicrous.
Unbelievable.
I don't understand that at all.
Now, would it help if you had, there's Megan allows me access to her medical records. So every time we go to a new doctor, there's something, I forget what it's called, but they have her sign it, and she names me as someone who is allowed to receive, I can't make decisions for her, but I can receive information. So if she were ever incapacitated in any way, you know, I go to talk to them, and sometimes somebody will be on the phone. And there were times when she was pretty ill where I had to make appointments for her and different things, and I would call to talk about symptoms. And if it was somebody who didn't know me on the phone, they didn't want to talk to me, and I would say, "Go look in her file. You know, she signed." I forget what it's called.
I can't remember what it's called.
A release, I guess.
Some sort of release.
She signed a medical release, and I'm allowed to discuss her treatment. So that might help a little
scenario.
bit.
That's Well, you have to get them.
Hardly ever happens. Yeah. Hardly ever happens.
Mm. Well, you know, like I said, I know some people in the beginning stages of this, and that was my advice. Get that signed. Better than nothing.
Get that signed.
Yeah.
So even if they sign something to let you have medical records, and people don't know this, but they can verbally retract it.
Oh. They can?
All they have to do is say, "Oh, I changed my mind."
Oh my!
If you can believe that.
I didn't know that.
The whole game's over.
Like forever, or just for that one thing?
Just for that one thing,
okay.
But still, that's, you know.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
If they're in a mood and they don't want.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. My son, there's some very common delusions that most people who have psychosis experience. Very common. One delusion is called capgras. It's named after the doctor who just, outlined it. And it is the belief that people in your life are replaced by inanimate things or robots, right? And so almost every single hospitalization, my son would call me after a day or two and say, "I'm calling to see if I can talk to my mom." And I would say, "This is your mom, but are you my real mom? Are you Laura?" And I'd say, "Yes." "Well, because they're telling me here that you got replaced by a robot. My mom is a robot." And I would say, "I'm not a robot." "Are you sure you're not a robot? Why are they telling me?" And I would say, "Well, I don't know, but I'm going to come and see you later, and you'll be able to see I'm not a robot." "Okay, thanks." It's just heartbreaking. So, but they all experience the same type of things. Same type of delusions. Someone's replaced with a robot, or they're being poisoned, or they know all the secrets of the government, right? And just very, very common threads that most patients experience.
Do you happen to know, is that the same in worldwide or just in the United States? Because
no, it's the same everywhere.
It's the same everywhere? Wow.
Mm-hmm. The illness is the same everywhere. It occurs with about the same frequency, 1 to 3% of the population. It occurs across the globe in that frequency, and the illness is the same almost in everyone who gets it. People are more or less on a spectrum of psychosis, just like we say someone's on an autism spectrum. Mm-hmm. And so it can be varied, but just the classic textbook case. They have all the same kind of delusions and et cetera.
There's been a lot of movies and books and things. Did you happen to see that movie from years ago, A Beautiful Mind?
Yes, I did. Mm-hmm.
Did you? Now that was based on a true story, so.
Yeah, very true.
Did you find that to be authentic?
Well, I have to say, you know, there are certain people who are going to do well, I think, no matter what illness they got. You know, that, I can't remember his name from A Beautiful, John Nash, right? He was brilliant. I mean, without a doubt, he was an amazing brain. He was brilliant. And so his schizophrenia crippled him, but he was still able to, you know, win a Nobel for early work.
There's a scene in that movie, which I know is not the case for everyone, but there's a scene in that movie where he has delusions, he hears voices, and he sees people. And it's going on for years. And there's a scene in that movie where I guess his wife is trying to tell him he's sick, and he doesn't believe this. These delusions are real to him. And he notices the people who he's been seeing have not aged.
Yeah.
And one of them is a little girl.
That was very good.
And he says the girl she never got any older, and he understands that they're not real. And it was interesting because they show years later he still sees them, but he doesn't engage with them. They're there, but he doesn't engage with them.
Can that really happen?
This is what he's saying really happened to him
in his life, because it's based on a true story.
Yeah, but I don't think that's, sadly, you can't reason with psychosis. Somehow he...
No, you can't talk people out of psychosis.
He was, I guess, lucky in that respect.
Well, I found that movie to be very poignant and very true, but John Nash is just a complete exception.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the Dr. Ellen Sachs?
No.
She is so she is very famous for being having schizophrenia, getting a doctorate in law, becoming an advocate, teaching law. She went to Oxford and put herself through all this advanced schooling, all while she was psychotic.
Wow.
So there are very few Ellen Sachs.
Yeah.
There are very few John Nashes.
Yeah.
Ellen Sachs
was a great story,
is going to rise to the top, no matter what. So we want to have hope for people with schizophrenia. We need to have hope. But by the same token, we need to acknowledge the spectrum of illness, that it can be very devastating, and that it requires a lot more medical support and family support and intervention than what we currently agree is necessary.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this is one of the things about stigma. What you're saying is awareness of the illness, not being reluctant to realize what it is. Saying to the mental health professional point blank, could this be schizophrenia? Because I have to know. I have to find out all I can about this. These are things you have to be proactive about to have a better outcome. So we want to raise awareness, for that reason.
Exactly.
As well as, of course, there's a lot going on with law enforcement right now, that certain situations, very obvious someone is unwell. It's not just a police situation. The police need training in recognizing a mentally impaired individual.
I read some places are getting, I forget what they're called, mental health, I forget what they're called, but they'll mental health professionals to go with the police
to help them.
Which I think is good.
Well, and I'll just give you an example of how that works in real life.
Okay.
My son was refusing to eat or drink. All the food and water was contaminated, literally for quite a few days.
Okay.
I was getting desperate. I called crisis intervention for the county that we lived in. They refused to, for the city actually, first. They refused to come. Then I called the county, and they said, well, put him on the phone. I mean, this is a kid that was debilitated, just wildly hallucinating all day. Put him on the phone, and we'll ask him if he wants us to visit.
We'll ask.
I mean, how does that? Yeah, it doesn't help. Then a few days later, they called, and they wouldn't visit, right? And a few days later, they called and wanted to know how we liked their services with a survey. So I told them. I told them how I liked it, And but that's just a very typical experience of, you know, their help is there, but the patient can't ask for it.
Yep.
It's about, here's the main point is, it is 100% a voluntary system.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely voluntary. There is no such thing, you know, as coercion. There's almost no such thing as forced medication. They have to be really bad off. And so in a voluntary system, the patient just refuses, and that's the end of treatment. That is it.
Well, there's a lot of changes that need to take place in this country, in the world, medically, legally, but I can't do any of that other than to follow you on Facebook, follow your group, and read about the things that you all bring to light, different laws, different incidents, petitions to sign, things like that. But from a more practical standpoint, I don't want to exclude dads, but it's the families who take care of these people. It's the families who are going to make a difference, and we really do need to raise awareness and remove stigma so that moms and dads have someone else to talk about when you suspect something like this. You know, I make it pretty known. I have 3 children that have all had some aspect of bipolar disorder. I make that pretty known, and if someone who's an acquaintance of mine feels that they might have that issue going on in their family, they know I'm comfortable talking about it. They know I know something about it. They'll come ask me my opinion, or they'll ask me for a recommendation to a doctor or a book to read, something like that. We need that for schizophrenia too, because it's, you know, I feel for the moms. I know it's dads too, but at the end of the day, it's mom that spends every waking minute, mom and dad, you know, worrying about this person, and it's heartbreaking. Some of the things you relayed and remember are heartbreaking, but I hope that the patient isn't always feeling that, but we do as moms. You know, I know that. So we've got to help each other. We have to help each other out in that situation. It's just so overwhelming. You know?
And people don't want to acknowledge it. They don't want to talk about it, and they don't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
I mean, a very good friend of mine, who's still my dear friend, I love him, but early on, he said to me, I was going to go to a party at his house, and he said, please don't talk about about mental illness or anything. It's just a drag for people. They don't want to hear it.
You know,
and I mean, he was just trying to have a fun party. I appreciate that. You know, like Debbie Downer comes to your party.
And you didn't have any time for fun in your life, I'm quite sure.
Oh my God. And so, but you know, that's just one example of the attitudes
you know what
that we're up against.
You know what I think it is with people, though? I mean, we encounter a little bit of that, but especially with schizophrenia is frightening. And it's frightening. And I think that people don't like to talk about it because you don't want to recognize that it can happen to anybody. Like if we hear about a deadly accident, the first thing people ask is, what caused that? Were they drinking? Were they speeding?
Right.
Because you're sorry that the people died or the people had a bad accident, but it's frightening to think that could just happen to anybody. So you feel comforted when you find out there was an extenuating circumstance. So with schizophrenia, that, you know, no history of it, no doing drugs, nothing that contributed to it, that is scary for people to acknowledge.
It is scary.
And that's why they shy away from it, I think. Yeah. I don't think they mean any harm, but that's why they shy away from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the parents don't want to face it. It's a devastating diagnosis, devastating. When they moved my son from the 4th floor, which was the mood disorder unit, to the 5th floor, which was the schizophrenia unit, this is 3 or 4 years into his treatment. But when they moved him up to the 5th floor, I just felt like they were writing him off, right?
Yeah.
Can't help him anymore. Dead-end case. You know, put him upstairs with the chronics. And I had a meltdown like no other in the hospital. Just completely melted down. And
that's your worst fear come to light.
Right. Yes, worst fear, honestly, come
But,
to light.
but
And
we have to change
all the other
that.
things that come with it, homelessness, suicide.
Yes.
You know, all the outcomes aren't great, so it's scary.
But we have to change that, and it's going to be moms who do it, in my opinion. Some dads too.
That's right.
But we do. We have to change that. Awareness is such a big thing. If everybody had more awareness, if these first episode clinics, this is tremendous, because that's something that's going to physically change the illness if more people get treatment early on, and then it doesn't have to have these kind of outcomes. So
yes, you're right.
That's very exciting that could really come to be.
Yeah.
And parents, I'll tell you what, whatever's going to be is going to be. You're denying it is only making it harder on everybody. It's you know,
I agree.
You've got
harder
to,
on the patient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My feeling with the minor mental illness that we dealt with was it's going to be, let me find out all I can, let me be prepared, let me do all I can about it. Some people's reaction is more, no, this will go away, this can't be happening. But you need to get out in front of it.
Yeah, get out in front of it.
If you're
and
wrong,
educate
good.
yourself.
So you're good. So you're prepared, and it wasn't as serious as you thought. Great. God bless you. You know, but
right.
Be ready. Be prepared, and you've got to help each other out, because if I knew you at the time you were going through this, knowing what I know now, I would have known that there were times you were exhausted. I would have said, "Can I make some phone calls for you?"
Right. Thank you.
I would have, after what I've been through, I would have known to do that for you. But ordinarily, if you're dealing with this kind of thing, your friends don't know what to do. We were talking about the casserole before. Where's my casserole? Right. You know, when you come back from, your son being in the hospital, where's your casserole that the neighbors brought? So, you can settle and not have to cook that night. Yeah. So we all have to do that for each other.
So it's very isolating for the patient because they become friendless.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
A therapist said, Zach can't talk about his day because nothing happens during his day. Right? Yeah. Like you run into a friend, oh, I just went here, I just did this, oh, I got a raise. Nothing happens to these patients. They have nothing to talk about. Their social life just comes to a grinding halt. And it's very isolating for them, and it's very isolating for the family.
Yes.
And I would ask everyone, if you know a family where someone is suffering depression, bipolar, an eating disorder, anything, don't turn away. Redouble your efforts to include them, to ask about the child, like you would with anything else.
Yep.
Yeah, I could see the value in that, really, because it's just like if you're having a tough time with anything else at home and you go to your friend's house and they say, oh, how's that going? You talk about it in a few minutes. It's a nice feeling to share that with somebody that cares, that validates you that must be difficult. And
yeah, and so I used to didn't have one friend. I did not have one friend whose child has a mental illness, and now I almost don't have any friends who don't.
Yeah.
That's your world. Your world becomes, and the people who can relate to you are the ones with sick children.
Yeah.
And the people so your friends drop out, they certainly do, and family members drop out.
Yep.
But I tell people, for every person that leaves you, every single one, as painful as it is to have your best friend turn away, or your cousins, not invite you, or whatever, as hard as that is, you will find another person that more than makes up for it. You'll find some friend that's just spectacular, exactly what you need, and so don't give up hope, but your whole world changes, basically, like mine did.
Yes, absolutely. And I remember telling Megan at some point where people were not understanding what she was going through, I said, you know what? Then that's wonderful, because they must just have no clue. They must have not ever suffered anything like this or had it in their family. So good for them,
Right.
We'll go make other friends.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you.
How we looked at it. So what can we say to, because I have moms that I know are listening, and they're not calling, like one or two of them were supposed to do, because they've probably got tears in their eyes because they're dealing with, the road I have ahead of me.
Right.
What can we say to those moms at the beginning of this journey?
First of all, try to, no matter what happens, try to carve out a little bit of time for yourself during the week. Even if it's an hour that you spend, alone in your car listening to music. Do something for yourself so that you're not overwhelmed by illness, because it can be overwhelming. Then I would say educate yourself as much as possible.
Yep.
My organization hands out notebooks to parents. They're like medical notebooks that we made.
What organization?
I run a small .org now called Parents for Care, and we are a caregiver support organization.
I did not know that.
And the main thing that we do is we take donations, very small donations, roll them up into bigger money, and then we help parents with sick children pay their bills.
Very nice.
And so, yeah, really necessary. That was probably the biggest lesson I learned was you're going to have a fiduciary responsibility for probably 50 years. So you better learn how to handle it.
Wow.
And so most people just hit the skids. They, the choice between making their house payment and buying expensive medicine, and things like that. So we bail them out with a one-time small financial grant, anywhere up to like between $300 or $400 and say like $2,000 to save their home, buy their medicine, get grocery. You wouldn't believe the stuff that we hear. People can't afford their food and their rent, and they can't keep the lights on.
Mm-hmm. No, I believe it. And that's a beautiful thing. That's parentsforcare.org. Is that right?
.org, yes. Mm-hmm.
And I love the idea about the notebooks you were saying. I always advise people who ask me about these things, bring a notebook to the doctors, think of some questions ahead. Because you get so emotional, you'll leave there. I always ask when there's a new medicine, what side effects should I expect? What should I not expect that I better call you if it happens? And we've only got 5 minutes left, so Megan, do you have any final questions, or I want to let Laura
I do have
wrap
one
up?
question. I wanted to know about resources for caregivers or family members of people with schizophrenia. You mentioned a book to me when we talked, and I looked it up, and it seems amazing. I just wanted to know if you could talk about that for a minute.
I'm not sick, I don't need help?
I'm not sick, I don't need help, yeah.
I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help by Dr. Xavier Amador, and he runs the LEAP Institute, and LEAP is his own creation, his own invention for techniques in dealing with the seriously mentally ill. But his book is a lifesaver. It gives you strategies to get your child in care, all the stuff that we try and that doesn't work out. And most parents I know just really find that book and the LEAP Institute very, very helpful. There's NAMI, National Association for Mentally Ill, National Alliance on the Mentally Ill. Yeah. They run support groups. NAMI has a very, very good family class called Family to Family, where they educate you about mental illness and, kind of reset your expectations for what to expect and what illness is. I would say don't ever give up trying to educate yourself on it. There's plenty of books out there on schizophrenia.
Yeah, and if you need a friend, look me up on Facebook. I'll be your friend.
Yes, and, find a friend and get with an organization. Attend a support meeting. When support meetings were brought up to me at the beginning, I said, I don't want to know what's happening to those people. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
I can barely handle what I have. Yeah. Of course, over time, I see the value of it.
Yeah, and it depends on the people, because I've spoken to people who didn't have a good experience at a support group, and it may have been a particular person or family that was there that particular night. So sometimes you have to try again a few weeks later or go to a different place. But we'll put all this information on the Brainstorms page, all these resources for people. And I can't thank you enough. You are the most fantastic guest in the world.
I know, we got so much information in.
Yeah. So just let me plug parentsforcare.org, because they can go there, sign up. They can write me an email, ask for a medical notebook. They're all paid for. I will mail it to you free. Check out the resources that we have. Check out another resource called My Helios, HEALIOS, My Helios. It's a great support for the mentally ill, for any kind of brain illness. Strategies helps. It's telecare, so the parent can attend therapy just for you to help you deal with the child.
Nice.
So don't give up. Keep looking for resources. Don't give up hope. Your child is worth it.
Yes.
So don't give up.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing such personal. Again, I'm sad that you will not know how many people you've made a difference for. But please believe me that you have.
Yes, thank you for doing this. It's so important that people understand and help each other through these things. And thank you so much for spotlighting what can really be a difficult subject. I appreciate that.
I think a lot of people misunderstand it, so I'm glad we got to talk to you and talk about all of the struggles with it and everything. Just thank you so much for calling in. And
you're welcome.
And I guess we're going to end the show in a minute, so...
Well, so everybody, you might want to buy I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help, or get it from the library. Get a medical notebook from parentsforcare.org if you can afford it. Maybe send them a small donation, but I would recommend everyone read that book, get the medical notebook.
Yeah.
And like I said, just look me up. If you don't have a support group, if you don't have friends who understand, I'll talk to you. And Laura, we'll stay in touch. Yes,
thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Thanks,
you too. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
All right, I didn't want to interrupt her speaking. I did get a few texts from moms who are appreciative of the information. So, again, we want to thank our guest. And
one person commented on our video, about 1 in 25 people live with serious mental illness, and many more people experience other less severe mental health issues. So
very true.
I think that's a cool thing to know. And I think it was a great show. We got a lot of information. Thank you all for listening. We are Brainstorm, sponsored by The Jerry Petito Show. We'll see you in a month.
On Hamiltonradio.net. See you next month. Lighter topic next month.
Yeah.
This was still important.